Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. We are talking today about a challenge that we know lots of leaders face, and this has been coming up a lot for clients of mine recently. And it's that situation where you're in a strategic role, a leadership role, and you know that you need to be strategic, and people tell you you need to be more strategic, and you have that capacity and that ability to be strategic. But one of the biggest blockers is when other people, so maybe your boss, founder, CEO, the exec team, whoever it may be, is asking questions or looking for detail that are pushing you back into that detail and getting you stuck in the operational weeds. So if you are in that situation or have been in that situation, then this is the episode for you. And we both see this so often, don't we, Pam, where people are like, I can do it, I want to do it, but I just don't get the chance to do it.
Yeah, and it can be really difficult as well, because obviously if people from above are asking you for information and they want it and it's urgent and all the rest of it, you do feel like you need to provide that information. And you know also that there's people in your team that are dealing with those things, and then you've got to then go to them, you're disturbing their flow, and it just escalates. So then I think sometimes you can feel like, I don't want to disturb their flow, so maybe I'll just get that information, or maybe I'll just dig around and find out the answers and then give it back. But then what you find then is you're moving so far away from being strategic, because you're just stuck in that day-to-day. And you just end up firefighting, and you're just constantly in that cycle where you just feel like you haven't got a minute. And we see that a lot, and especially when people want to progress in their career, because if they're stuck in that cycle of trying to be strategic but not actually being able to manage it because of the expectations from above, it really does affect their career progression and the things that they can deliver on an annual basis as well.
Yeah, and this is really about managing up, isn't it, in that situation? It's about being able to try and reduce the pressure or reduce the impact of that pressure to provide detail upwards that you are trying to empower members of your team to be able to do that stuff. So you're trying to distance yourself from the detail, but then you're being asked for it, and that's what throws you back in. So what are some of the situations when it happens? Why do senior leaders ask these real detailed questions when what they're telling you is you need to be more strategic, you need to operate more strategically? Why does it happen?
I think sometimes they just want visibility of what's going on. So I always feel like there's a few things there, because if they're consistently asking for that low level detail, it's like, how can we provide that information for them so that they're not consistently asking for it? Now, you do get some senior leaders that will micromanage, and that will be into the detail. And sometimes you think, do you really need to be in that detail? But they want to know that information. That's how they've always worked. And I think it's how you take stock and go, hold on a minute, this is happening more consistently. This is taking me away from what I'm doing. How am I managing the relationship with this person? Is it a case of they ask for the information, I run off and try and provide it? Or am I trying to manage their expectations? Am I involving my team? Because it's a great opportunity to start developing your team and allowing your team members who are responsible for that particular information to start sharing the updates if it's relevant.
Feel like you just covered so much in that little element. So let's start to unpick it little bit by little bit. I think one of the things that really struck me, given I've done a lot of work with founder-led businesses, is that description of people that are just really used to that detail oversight. They're used to, so founders have typically started a business from scratch. They had to be in and around every single detail in the early days. They've then built a team, but they're used to that operational level. They're used to those days when they could get access to every piece of information, and they don't want this kind of size and structure of the organization to get in the way of that. So I think I've seen an awful lot of that. And I used to think it was quite specific to founder-led businesses, this kind of, oh, we want you to be strategic, but then we're going to ask you stuff about the real detail. But the more that I've worked with clients in much bigger organizations, the more I've recognized that's not actually the case. And I think particularly where people have been promoted internally, you're absolutely right. They have that kind of habit from their background of they used to know all the stuff. They're used to. Now they're perhaps more removed. They're more senior. They don't have that oversight. They don't have that visibility, and it feels uncomfortable for them. And so some of the trust is really key. So let's start to unpick, because you started to touch there on some of the solutions that people could put into play. So I think one of the things that you talked about was that importance of getting to that stage where that person is backing off. So how can you communicate in a way where you don't have the level of detail that they seem to want, but you don't feel like they really need it? Because I think that's a very specific scenario, isn't it? It's hang on, you're asking me all that detail, but do you really need it? That just taking me off on a day trip to go and dig into data to be able to find you that information. How can you handle that scenario?
I think this, when you're in that situation, I always feel like this is a really good opportunity to build relationships with your senior leader, with your line manager. And for me, it's always about understanding, like, what do you want that information for? So it's not about being defensive or going back to them and saying, is it necessary? Do we need, what do you need it for? It's more of a case of, what is this supporting? Is there a better way that we can do this? Like, how can we do this so that you're getting it in a timely manner and it's not putting me under pressure, and I can use this as a way to also start to develop the team as well. So I suppose it's about opening up the conversation, opening up the communication, and really understanding. Because in the past, when I've been in a similar situation, it was always about that person needing the information because they didn't want to look stupid in a meeting. So they wanted the information to the nth degree, because if they were ever in a meeting, they didn't know what was going to come up or what they were going to get asked, but they didn't want to be seen to not have all of the information and have the full picture. So that put extra pressure on me and the team to then be constantly providing all of that information. And it was just as simple as starting to break it down. Now, it wasn't just one conversation and it solved everything. It was like multiple conversations over multiple weeks. But eventually we got to the point where he was like, okay, this is what I think I need. This is when I think I'll need it. These are the areas where I feel exposed. And we changed the reporting structure so that he was getting that information. Now, that's just one way of doing it, but I do feel like opening up that communication and starting those conversations was really helpful. And from my perspective, developing into further up the ladder, it was really helpful for me to understand like the meetings he's going to and why it matters. And that really helped me to develop and progress in my role as well.
Yeah, I think that is so key, of understanding the intent behind that question of what is it that means you need this detail? Where's it coming from? What's the reason for the question? Can really help you to respond in a way that is going to give people what they genuinely want and need without it causing that issue of you feeling on the back foot and going chasing your tail. And I think it's also about sometimes reminding them of what level they need to be operating at, not by saying, back off, you need to be at that level. But I remember similarly a time in my own career where somebody asked me for something, and in my head, I was just, yeah, of course, I'm all over that. That's fine. So I was really quite, probably in their eyes, quite dismissive of the detail that they were asking for, but almost in my head, it was just, yeah, of course, I'm all over that. It's fine. So I wasn't understanding the intent of they need to feel like they understand. So we were having some regulatory changes and there was stuff that we need to implement as a result of that. So in their head, this is quite a big thing. It's quite a lot of detail that's going to need to sit under these regulatory changes that are going to impact multiple functions within the organization. And so what they actually needed was not the detail of the project plan. It was for me to give them that reassurance that, okay, this is the date we're going to have implemented by. These are the steps that we already know we're going to take. We're still in the scoping stage. So I'll keep you updated. I'll provide more detail. And if I'd have given a fuller answer like that, I think the response would have been very different, because there was almost this panic of, you don't seem to be taking these regulatory changes very seriously. So the impression I gave was absolutely the opposite of being strategic. It was that sense of, you just don't seem bothered or seem to understand the ramifications if we don't get this right. Whereas in my head, it's, of course I'm going to deal with that. That's my job. Leave me to it. So I think sometimes it's that mismatch in communication and ensuring that people really get that opportunity to understand, I'm not in the detail of that, but these people on my team are. If you have specific questions I can't answer, they might be able to answer them for you. Or, like in your example, how do we put systems in place so that you've got the information that you need to be able to go to the meetings that you need to go to, have the detail, have the data to refer to, have it available to interrogate in the ways that are going to give you comfort. That's what's happening. So I think there's another thing, though, where sometimes if you are perhaps used to being in the detail yourself, I see it where people spiral into detail that they're maybe not actually asked for and they are maybe perceiving. So there's sometimes a temptation, isn't it, to show your workings and show, like, I know all of the detail on this, that I think is perhaps perceived rather than real.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Sometimes there's that tendency, if somebody is constantly asking you for information and they're a super detailed person, I always think there is that tendency that you will go and show your workings and over deliver on the amount of information that you're providing. And I think that's where the communication and the conversations are super important. So in that example I just gave, I felt like my manager at the time was super detailed. Like in some ways he was micromanaging, but when we started having those conversations about why he needed the information, what he was using the information for, we actually built up a lot more trust in our relationship. And I was able to say, like where you were saying there, like I was all over it, like I was able to say that as well, but then give him the information that he needed so that he felt at his level he was also all over it. And that's what he needed. He didn't want to feel exposed. So I always think when you're in those situations, rather than just giving everything and, like you say, showing your workings and ending up being over detailed, just starting to ask some questions like, what will this information be used for? Is there a better way that I can give you this information? Is there a different frequency that you need to receive this information? There's lots of different questions that you can start asking that allow you to understand more about what they need. And like in my situation, we ended up providing in the end like minimal information really in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough for him to be able to answer the questions that he needed to answer. So I think when you get to that point and you build that trust and you build that relationship, it makes it easier, and you're constantly developing yourself when you're doing that as well.
And I think another really important way to develop yourself is to really just manage your responses and reactions in the moment when you get asked those detailed questions. Because if somebody says to you, what's the exact spend on such and such a, I don't know, this digital marketing campaign so far, then if you're naturally a detail person and you've got all that detail and you do know it, then you might start reeling off, we spent this much on Facebook ads and this much on pay-per-click, on this much on this. And then you find yourself perpetuating that cycle where they are used to asking you that question and you respond with the detail. Whereas if what you say is, in response to the same question, something more, we've spent about 60% of the budget so far. We're focusing more on this area where we're seeing better results. We've been testing this kind of approach, and it's looking like this is how we're going to proceed. That person has probably got the answer that they actually wanted, even though they might have asked about the budget spend. What they really wanted was reassurance that you're in control of the budget. So I think sometimes, even without asking questions, it's about understanding the intent of what's driving that question. What do they need me to show or display or to give them reassurance of, so that they can feel like, okay, I can chill, I can let that go. They clearly are all over it. So it's like the opposite of my example where I totally misjudged it. But that sense of just giving that person the reassurance that they need, that you are in control. And that can apply to project management questions about legislation changes and regulatory stuff like I was talking about. There's loads of different areas where it's that what people really want is the reassurance that you're over it and you get it and you're managing it. And then they can chill and not have to ask the detailed questions.
Yeah, and just as you were talking through that, then I was just thinking it's also when you're in that situation, it can be hard sometimes if you've got some insecurities or you're feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome, or, there's something going on that's knocking your confidence. When those people from above start firing questions at you, it can feel like a test. It can feel like you're fighting for your job every single day. Like they're asking this information and it almost becomes like a little bit of a battle. And I think sometimes when you feel like that, it's about looking inwards as well and going, right, what is going on? How is this making me feel? Because if it's making you feel bad, if them asking you the questions, asking for more detail and all the rest of it is making you feel bad, insecure, like imposter syndrome's creeping in, then it is time, I think, to stop and look inwards and go, right, okay, let's see what's going on for me, because it's not really about them and what they're asking, because yeah, if I need to get that info, I can get it. But how is this making me feel? And I think that's where then you can really start developing yourself and the way that you deal with those situations and the conversations.
I think that's such a good point, because when you're asked questions about detail that kind of push you to that level, I feel like that can often prompt a need where you feel like you've got to prove yourself, like you've got to prove that you have that level of detail, you can access that level of detail, you can get that. And you feel like that's an expectation that they're setting, that you have that level of detail. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I see both types of things. So there's the frustration of, look, I do know what I need to know. I trust my team. I'm getting them to deliver. But also I see that element of, oh, I should know this. I should be in the detail. I should have access to this. If they're asking, clearly, then they expect me to know. So I should know this. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It can trigger some of those insecurities and some of that feeling that you're on, you're on test and the expectation of you is this. And that can cause some of that perfectionism, some of that real kind of overwork to try and be on top of every detail. And I think the risk then is that actually it drives you into, if you don't have the skill to handle it back up, then the risk is that it drives you to become more micromanaging. Because if you feel insecure without all of the detail, then the only way to have all of the detail is to be probably too close to every single person on every single task, because that's the way that people feel in control.
Yeah, and again, that is such a good point, isn't it? Because when you break down micromanagement, nobody is ever micromanaging anybody because they want to be mean and nasty. Usually, the thing that sits underneath it all is just that need to know what's going on, that need for certainty, and all of that stuff that links in. It's such a good point. And I think if you're kind of feeling this at the moment, or you're going through this, or you felt it in the past, you might be able to identify with some of these things. And I suppose it's a good time to just stop and go, how do I overcome this? How can I develop myself and move forward? And I do think we get so bogged down in the day-to-day that we forget about personal development. Like, we start off the year or the quarter or however we do it with this great plan, and then we get so bogged down in the day-to-day and providing the detail and all of the other stuff that we do that we forget about our own personal development. And I always feel like things like this are just so important and super key. And these are things you can talk about in an interview. These are things that you can use to really drive your own personal development forward and test yourself and push yourself to overcome these things and become a better leader and feel like you're progressing in your career and in your job generally.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Because I think the skills that you need to handle this situation effectively are going to be applicable and relevant to lots of different areas of strategic leadership. They're not specific and unique to this scenario. So if we were to really pinpoint those 3 skills then for people to focus on and take away and consider, how am I going to implement this? What would they be?
So the first one's going to be the strategic communication element. So making sure that you're speaking at the right level and linking your updates to what really matters. And then I think number 2 would be about reassuring without over explaining and almost catching yourself on if you realize that you're doing that. And each time you go into those situations and conversations, being more self-aware so that you stay on track, and you'll then be able to project that calm confidence even when you've not got all the answers. And then I think the third thing is about the stakeholder anticipation. So understanding what your stakeholders care about and trying to stay one step ahead of them will make everything a lot easier for you as well.
Yeah. And I think you summarize it as, oh, it's easy. It's these 3 things. It's definitely not easy. And we definitely have empathy for the fact that this is something that does take energy. It does take effort. And I think those 3 things are your kind of building blocks, but each of those is a skill set in its own right and is going to take some time. If you are in that situation where you're trying to step up and be more strategic and you're being constantly pulled into the weeds, coaching can be incredibly helpful because it just gives you that space to reflect and consider, how could I have handled that situation? How am I going to handle that situation again? So we can work with you on specifics for your scenario. So tools, communication techniques, strategies that are going to work that help you show up as the leader that you want to be. So if that is something you need to explore, then just drop us a message. And as ever, we're always really happy to chat. But hopefully this episode has given some insight, some reassurance that you're not alone in facing this situation, and some insight into some of those steps and strategies that might be helpful if that's what you're facing. As ever, thank you so much for listening. If there are topics that you would like us to cover, then please do send them in. We love to make episodes like this that we know are happening for our clients and for our listeners. So please do drop us a message, and we will be back next week with another episode. Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.